Another busy week in Parliament with lots of debates around the cost of living crisis, especially around interest rates. Interest rates and the Bank of Canada have been a hot topic of conversation for more than 2 years. Most of you know that the Bank of Canada sets interest rates, and those interest rates impact virtually all borrowers. That includes folks with a variable rate mortgages and those who have locked in to a rate hike but are coming up for refinancing. It also includes lines of credit and other loan instruments. It's now been over 6 months since the Bank of Canada raised interest rates to 5%, which is an historic high. What are the effects of that move? Folks have different time paying for their mortgages and other expenses. These struggles were discussed in Parliament. Watch.
Madam Speaker, the Governor of the Bank of Canada said yesterday that government spending will keep inflation and possibly interest rates high, which will increase home costs and mortgage renewal costs, as well as rents. After 8 years, this government still doesn't seem to understand that balancing the budget within a predictable time frame would simply be a common sense measure. Will this government take measures to get back to a balanced budget as soon as possible? In the next budget, in fact. Well, it's very interesting to see what the Conservative Party's history on this is.
Deficit is the story of the Conservative Party. In fact, what do we see now? A AAA credit rating, the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. We rank third in the OECD, Madam Speaker, when it comes to attracting foreign direct investment. Deal after deal has been concluded by the Minister of Industry, including in my region of southwestern Ontario and St. Thomas specifically, and Windsor, to see electric vehicle battery plants built. That gets Canadians working. Of course, we see also a very low unemployment rate, Madam Speaker.
Honorable député de Beauport.
The government member answering the question said something interesting that needs some context. For example, housing costs in Canada have increased 40% faster than incomes. That's the worst gap in any G7 country and the second worst of all the 40 OECD countries. It's also twice as bad as the OECD average. Additionally, Canada's housing is now 25 to 45% more expensive than that of the United States, even though their economy is 10 times bigger, their population is 10 times larger, and they have less land to build on. As usual, it's important to provide background to balance what sometimes in political circles can look like cherry picking of statistics. What's important to point out, of course, is that the incredible amount of spending by Ottawa to the tune of $600 billion has caused inflation that the Bank of Canada has attempted to address through 10 interest rate hikes in less than a year and a half. This puts tremendous pressure on borrowers and consequently on their household budgets. Watch this exchange on this topic.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has accomplished something that only he could do. Our central bank, which can create cash, is actually losing money. Now, how did this happen? He forced the central bank to create $600 billion of cash to fund his overspending over the last 3 years. To pay for it, the bank makes deposits into the accounts of large financial institutions. Interest rates on those deposits, of course, have gone through the roof, meaning that taxpayers are now forced to bail out those losses. Will he admit that his incompetence now forces Canadians to pay twice, once for the inflation the money printing caused, and twice to bail out the bank, which is failing?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if the Leader of the Opposition is aware, but Canada has the lowest debt to GDP ratio and the lowest deficit in the G7. And what we do on this side of the House is maintain prudent fiscal responsibility while investing in Canadians, especially vulnerable Canadians. Let's look at the Canada Child Benefit. Let's look at $10 a day childcare. Let's look at the Canada Dental Benefit, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we actually have compassion for Canada.
This exchange also referenced statistics, so let's contextualize them in what Canadians are seeing on the ground across the country. For example, we now have 30 homeless encampments in Halifax, and the same pattern is true for virtually all other cities in Canada. In terms of housing, young people have to save until they're 40 years old to purchase their first home. That's quite frustrating to many young folks. My guest today will help me parse some of the statistics and realities experienced by Canadians. He is quite well known in the Niagara area. His name is Tim Hudak. He was a former MPP for Niagara West and the former leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario, and we'll talk to him when he comes back.